Please welcome to the stage, John Perkins.
Thank you. I stood in front of the Shah of Iran, the presidents of Indonesia, Ecuador, Panama, members of the Royal House of Saudi Arabia, and I've said something like, in this hand, I have millions of dollars for you and your friends if you play our game. In this hand, I have a gun in case you decide not to. Now, my words were more diplomatic than that, but that was the message. I was an economic hitman. And we economic hitmen have created a new global economy, really, a form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism. It isn't working. We all know this. The oceans are rising. The glaciers are melting. Less than 5% of us live here in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources, while half the world is on the verge of starvation, or actually starving. That's not a model. China can't do it. India can't do it. They're trying, but they can't do it. We have to change. We have to have a revolution. We must change the system. I'll get into that in a minute, but first, how did I become an economic hitman? While I was still in business school, I was interviewed by the National Security Agency, the NSA. They put me through a series of extensive psychological tests, including on a lie detector. It's a long story, but to make a long story short, I ended up going in the Peace Corps and being sent deep into the Amazon rainforest. Now, I'd grown up the son of a teacher in a boys' prep school for very wealthy boys in rural New Hampshire. I grew up with lots of snow and cold, kind of like here in the winter, you know? And suddenly I find myself living in a thatched roof hut in the steamy jungle. You think I adjusted easily to that? After the Peace Corps, I then took a job. I was given a job as an economist at an international consulting firm in Boston with close ties to the NSA and the CIA. I was trained by a woman named Claudine Martin, whose job it was to train me to be an economic hitman. Now, Claudine had seen my NSA files. She knew that I wanted three things that I thought all my prep school buddies, the rich kids, had had: money, power, and sex. Claudine was really good at her job, and she promised me the first two: money and power. And she taught me quite a bit about the third. And then she told me what my job would entail. I would go to countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil. I'd arrange a huge loan to those countries from the World Bank or its sister organizations, but the money wouldn't actually go to the country. It would go to our corporations, Bechtel, Halliburton, Brown and Root, familiar names, to build big infrastructure projects in those countries and incidentally make huge profits in the process. They'd build power plants and industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in the country, the ones that own the industries. But the majority of the people would suffer. They would be left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we'd go back and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations. Privatize. Sell your utilities, your schools, your jails, everything like that to our corporations. And Claudine also told me that if the leaders of these countries refused my offer, people she called jackals would be right behind me. I didn't actually carry a gun, but the jackals did. My first assignment was in Indonesia, a country that had just ended a terrible civil war where more than 1 million people had been killed. It had a terrifying reputation. And I have to admit that when I arrived in Jakarta, knowing I'd be there for about 3 years, my knees were shaking pretty bad. My stomach was filled with fluttering butterflies. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I was a very young man. I just knew that I was expected to produce a report that would convince the Indonesian government to build an extremely expensive electrical system, hiring our corporations to do it. Fortunately for me, the winner of the Civil War President Suharto, who was actually a dictator, wanted the projects that I was offering, and he also wanted CIA and Pentagon protection. In the end, I produced a report that forecasts the need for electricity at an unheard of annual rate of 19%. Indonesia got its loan. Our corporations made lots of money, and I was promoted from economist to chief economist. CIA developed a program called Operation Condor to support right-wing dictatorships in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, throughout the continent. Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, democratically elected, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, strongly opposed Operation Condor. I was sent down to get them to change their ways. They wouldn't. They refused. Roldos was killed when his private plane crashed in what many believe was not an accident. Torrijos said, if CIA killed my friend Jaime, I'll probably be next. In less than 3 months, he died when his private plane crashed under very similar circumstances. You're going to hear after the break from a Marine Corps general who was in Panama at the time, and he agrees with me that these were probably, at least Torrijos was probably assassination. We don't really know who caused it. And I want to say that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe in some overarching conspiracy to take over the world. But I do read reports. I think I'm a conspiracy factualist. You know, I read just recently declassified information, the CIA's own website, where they admit that the US government was deeply involved in the overthrow or assassination of Prime Minister Mossadegh of Iran, President Allende of Chile, Arbenz of Guatemala, Diem of Vietnam, Lumumba of the Congo. And speaking of Allende of Chile, he was replaced by the terribly brutal dictator, General Pinochet, who was a great defender of Operation Condor and also oversaw the murder of tens of thousands of his people, and was praised by Secretary of State Henry Kissinger as a great defender of capitalism. I believe in national security, and I don't believe that US security is served. I believe it's jeopardized when our agencies overthrow or assassinate the leaders of other countries because they don't follow our policies. I'm a capitalist. I think that capitalism has given us incredible technology, art, science, medicine. I think it holds out the hope for the future. But there's this new form of capitalism that I call predatory capitalism that's the enemy of true capitalism. Let me explain. When I was in business school, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for his company and also makes sure his company is a good citizen. He pays his workers a fair wage, gives them health insurance and retirement pensions, pays taxes, imagine that, and supports local school and recreational facilities and so on and so forth. And in essence, he makes sure that his company serves the public interest. That all changed in 1976 when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics and stated, amongst many other things, the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. It changed everything. And it has created this global fiasco, what I believe we're headed toward this disaster, where we're in it a lot now with the climate change, with all the things that we all know is happening, and we must change that. And we can change that. How? Change the rules. So I think that's where we're at today. Change the rules. I like the rules I learned in business school, that a good corporation, a good CEO should make sure that his corporation serves the public interest, is a good citizen. I like the idea that you and I should invest in corporations that, instead of essentially destroying the resources upon which our economy is based, instead of doing that, they clean up pollution, regenerate destroyed environments, develop new technologies for more efficient energy, transportation, communications, and just about everything else. In essence, let's get our corporations to create an economic system that is itself a renewable resource. Are you ready to do that? Yes, I think we're all ready. We can create this renewable resource so our corporations today really run the world. They control most of the politics in this country and just about everywhere else. But it's important to remember that they need us. We work for them, we manage them, many of you own them, you run them. They depend on us to buy their goods and services, to invest in them, to work for them, to support them through our tax dollars. We have the power. You have the power. Earlier, we heard this incredible music about our passion and our power. Let's put our passion to work. This brings us to you. What is it you can do, each and every one of you? What can we all do? Well, I think perhaps the most important thing to start off by saying is that we are living at a time in history when the individual, you, has more power than ever before. I travel a great deal around the world, speaking at events like this and many others. And everywhere I go, whether it's in Asia or Africa, South America, Europe, Middle East, the United States, people are waking up to the fact that we live on a very tiny, fragile space station with no shuttles. And it's headed for disaster, and we got to turn it around. We can do it. So in my latest book, which is for sale out here, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I have a whole section devoted to what you can do, lists and ideas. But I want to just mention 3 of them here today, kind of in summary. So remembering that we have this power today, especially with the internet. Number 1, search out and spread, shine a light on the story behind the story. I think my life as an economic hitman highlights the fact that there's almost always a story behind the story. So number 1, look for, spread the story behind the story. Number 2, use local, individual, and community power, your power, to change politics, to change the governmental system, to change the laws. We, the people, must do it. We can't wait for a president to do it, whoever the next president is. We have to do it, and that's our job in a democracy, to do that. Recently, the small state of Vermont, with less than 0.2% of the US population, a tiny group of people in that small state, got laws passed that forced corporations to label GMOs. As a result, 5 of the major food companies, ConAgra, General Mills, Kellogg's, Campbell Soup, Mars, all committed to labeling GMOs here in Michigan and everywhere else in the United States. And I just recently heard Hugh Grant, not the actor, but the CEO of Monsanto, on the radio saying that that's impacting him hugely. So, number 2, join an organization or start one that impacts local laws, national laws, global laws. Do it. Get involved, please. This is something important that we all can do. And number 3, help a corporation understand that it must serve a public interest.